What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another Q&A session. Today I want to break out a whiteboard session again. We are going to talk about what a database administrator does. Not a very common topic. I haven't really had anyone ask me except for one person about this topic here, but I think that it's a very important role out there in the information technology world, and I think that these folks need some recognition, and that's what I'm going to do today, is tell you what a database administrator does, okay? Before we get into what they do, if you're not familiar with what a database is, essentially what it is just think of it as basically like a hard drive with a bunch of information that all have relationship with each other, okay? So for example, the database contains tables, indexes, views, and then there's without getting too deep into it, it's basically made up of a bunch of information all put together real nicely into, well, I shouldn't say nicely, it depends on how you look at it, but if you were to look inside of a database and look at all the information, that's where everything is put together, okay? So basically it's a bunch of code that are made up by using what's called a stored procedure, which is one way, and what they do is they code it, they program this, and so it's basically the back end of any piece of software that requires a database. So it's the stuff that we don't see on the front end side of stuff as a regular user, okay? It's all just the programming behind everything. So it's a conglomerate of all these different things inside of a database or inside of a square box, if you will. And there's these ties, and you've got tables that all tie into each other, made up of constraints, and so it gets a little bit detailed and it gets complicated. You've got to really understand a little bit about programming as well to really deep dive. I know enough to be dangerous inside of a database as far as reading the information, but a database administrator is not necessarily the person that will actually create the databases. In some cases, it will be, okay? In some companies, you might have a database administrator who's also responsible for actually creating databases, but it's not that often, because those people are kind of separated out. They're the ones that are actually, it's kind of like a coder or a programmer or software engineer. Those people are isolated in their own world. Their task is to create and program and basically create software, right? So a database administrator has similar responsibilities as a system administrator or network administrator, kind of like what I talked about in a previous video. All right. Obviously, their responsibilities are a little bit different because of the nature of the way databases work. Okay, and just so you know, two of the most common database software out there is going to be something called Microsoft SQL Server or SQL, and then you've got Oracle, okay? So two of the biggest players in the industry, both have their own SQL backends, very, very popular in the world, and so you're going to find that these are, pretty much dominant out there. I can't speak for Linux. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I've got plenty of friends that watch these videos that are Linux gurus, so they can chime in if they'd like. Dan and Tamika specifically. So anyways, let's get into it. So basically, they are responsible for the server that hosts these databases. Okay, so you've got a big piece of equipment that's running your SQL Server software. And typically it's going to be run on a Microsoft operating system or Oracle. So these folks are responsible for managing those servers, okay? And much like a system administrator, okay? So they are responsible for that server. They are basically looking after all of these different aspects. So notice here I've got DB in parentheses. That's short for database. That's the acronym we use. And so you'll see that throughout here. But anyways, they're going to be monitoring database health. They're going to be looking at the performance metrics for it. There's all different kinds of, you know, for example, in Windows, you've got Performance Monitor, but there's all different types of utilities you could use to monitor the health of the databases. Even inside of I'm only familiar with Microsoft SQL Server, so I can only speak on that platform. But for example, with SQL Server, there's something called the SQL Management Studio, and that's the GUI-based version where you're managing all the different aspects of your databases, okay? And that's where you're looking at everything. And so inside of the Management Studio are tools that you could use to monitor stuff, all right? For example, they are responsible for handling the backups and recovery plans for the databases. Pretty simple. They create the backup plans. They work with the backup team if there's a different, well, obviously there is. The database admin is not going to be responsible for backup software, so they're going to have to work with their IT team to figure out the backup strategy for their databases. And then, of course, they need to have some kind of recovery plan in the instance that something goes wrong, okay? So recovery or restore, however you want to talk about it. They're responsible for updating the database software. So, for example, Microsoft SQL Server, they, just like Windows, they're coming out with new versions of SQL Server, okay? They're up to 2016 at this point. So Microsoft SQL Server 2016, and you got 2014, I'm sorry, 2012, and you got 2008. So every few years they're going to come out with a different version of SQL Server. So of course you want to be sure that you're maintaining that, you're keeping up with that. And one thing to keep in mind is that you have to be sure that whatever software applications are running on the databases that you're responsible for actually support the version of SQL Server. So there's some compatibility things as well that they have to be very diligent about, okay? So installing new applications, right? Because essentially that's what's running on the database. You've got applications or software that are running on these databases, so we've got to make sure that we've got the new versions of those. They are responsible for designing the database infrastructure, okay? And so what that means is that they're figuring out, they're designing, they're configuring how the database infrastructure is going to work, how many SQL servers do they need, what type of setup they need for the databases, because there's a lot of things you could do with databases as far as mirroring and log shipping, and there's all this different stuff that you could do to replicate databases across servers. So there's a lot of things that need to go on, especially when you're in a big organization that has data centers all over the place. That's part of your job, is to keep that in line. Security of the databases, make sure that they're secured the way that they need to be secure, because just like anything else, they're running on a server, they need to be secured. There are permissions that need to be applied to the databases based on a lot of different things, okay? So they have to make sure that they are giving the proper people in the organization the correct permissions to access the database for different purposes, for management purposes and things like that. Now, we're not talking about permissions for regular users out in the environment that are doing, that are outside the IT department. I'm talking about people that are in the IT department that need access to these databases those types of permissions, okay? Migrating databases to new hardware or between servers. Sometimes they need to move databases around. So they're responsible for that, you know. If you've got new hardware coming in, you're swapping out to a new server altogether. They need to be able to migrate that information, migrate those databases over to the new box, okay? They're often going to be asked to create reports, okay? And these reports are probably going to be requested from different departments or inside the organization. So they're going to want to know different things about, you know, what's going on with the software. And it could be anything, right? And so sometimes they're going to have to be running some sort of SQL query to produce these reports. And so then they're going to be doing that as well. And again, running the SQL queries is something that they might need help from a database programmer, okay? They might need help from them to put together these queries because, again, it's part of software code, okay? So running queries is something you've got to learn, right? It can get real fancy, let's just say that. Creating new databases. So sometimes there's going to be a need to create a new database for whatever reason. So say that a company wants to create their own piece of software in-house to do some management, for example. You know, there's all kinds of things that you could do inside of a corporation to manage different things. So they might say, you know, they might have an in-house programmer that says, all right, I'm going to put together this program. I need a database created for it. So the database administrator will go and create the new database admin, and then the programmer can come in and then do what they need to do. Database upgrades, kind of self-explanatory there. And then troubleshooting. So anything that's going on, they're responsible for this SQL server. That's their baby. So they need to be able to troubleshoot everything that's involved with the back end of their database server. And then they've got to work with vendors, okay? Because again, their databases are working, they're basically hosting application software, right? So a lot of times these are third-party companies, and so you've got to be able to have a relationship and work with them. And then again, work with your IT team. You know, you've got to be able to have that relationship between your coworkers, because a lot of times, hey, I mean, it's within the same network. So if there's communication problems between the SQL server and everything else in the environment, they need to be able to communicate with their network administrator, for example. Okay, so when I've talked about in the past that you've got to be able to have a relationship inside of the IT department internally, this is why it's so important, is because everybody has a role, okay? And we all depend on each other to run this shop. And so that's part of what this is. And you'll see this in every single video where I do some sort of demonstration about what this type of person does, okay? And so that's pretty much it. If you're a database administrator watching this video and I've left something out, I'd love to hear from you. Leave it in the comments section below. This kind of gives a synopsis of my experience of what it's like to be a database administrator. I've been fortunate enough to been working with software for 10 years now, and its back end is sitting on a SQL server. So I'm in it almost every single day, and so it can get a little bit complicated, but and it's not for everybody. So anyways, I hope that helps you out if you're interested in doing some database administration work. That's always another area of IT that you can have a look at, because frankly there's a need for them. Okay, but anyways, hope that helps you out. Leave the comments below, thumbs up, subscribe if this is your first time here. I want to welcome you. Everyone else that keeps watching these videos, I can't say enough how much I appreciate you all. And And we'll talk to you here on the next video. Leave your questions below. Even if it's not on this topic, I don't care. You can put questions below. Talk to you next time. See ya.